Hello buzzers, John here, and in this video I wanted to go through a process called, let's invent a name for it, autumnification. This is where you want to add autumnal colours, those vibrant reds and oranges, to a leaf, but you haven't quite got a leaf in its full autumnal colouring yet. Now, as we all know, autumn can be very rapid or very slow, but what we all love to see are those vibrant reds and oranges around the edges of a leaf, particularly if it's offset against some contrasting colours, such as the browns and vivid greens in this shot. So what we have here is a found still life, but we want to give it a bit of extra zing and a bit of extra drama, so it becomes one of those shots you keep, rather than one that you maybe don't keep. Okay, so that's the plan. We want to introduce some more colour into this leaf. But of course, if we pick up a brush and start painting onto it, it's all going to go wrong. Let me show you why. We've got the brush tool selected at the moment, and if we change our foreground colour swatch to a vibrant red, then that will be imported and that'll be the colour we paint with. So we'll do that first. Let's just click on this foreground colour swatch, then we bring up the colour picker and we can choose a nice vibrant red up in the top right corner and click OK. So that's our red in place, but of course if we try and paint with that, it's all going to go horribly wrong because we're only using one layer and we've got no separation between the leaf and its background. So let's undo that with Control or Command and Z, and let's think about another way we could do it. What we have to do is separate that leaf from the background, and the best way to do this is to get a selection round it first of all and punch it into a separate layer. So we need our layers palette up on screen, so to get there just go to Window and choose Layers from the list if yours isn't already on screen. Then what we want to do is make an accurate selection of this leaf. Now there are various ways of making selections, and normally when you have a complex subject against a tricky background, the best port of call is the pen tool. That's this one here. But the trouble with the pen tool is it's a fully manual route and it's very, very slow to use. Very accurate because you're making all the decisions, but very slow. So when you're just having a play or doing some Photoshop doodles, it's often much better to find a tool that can select a subject a lot quicker. It may not be as good a selection, but at least you'll move forward a bit faster. And what I'm going to use is the Quick Selection tool. That's this one up here. You'll find it grouped with the Magic Wand tool, which is another fast selection tool. So select the Quick Selection tool, and then all we're going to do is use a small brush, and I'm just going to start painting over the leaf. And look at that, it's finding all those edges, all the contrast. It's actually using lots of very clever Photoshop algorithms to detect the subject and pick it out of the background. So that's how quick it was to make that selection, but how good is it? Let's zoom in and find out. You can see that round here it's pretty good. If we hold down the spacebar and scroll around, we've missed a bit here. So because I've got a very small brush, I'm only using a 10 pixel brush here, we can just extend into that. You find it selects some of the background, then it works it out and snaps back to the edge. And that's how the Quick Selection tool works. It looks for contrast and colour changes between the subject that's selected and the background it's sitting on and tries to get right to the edge. And it does a pretty good job, but you have to go quite finely around the edge with a small brush just to make sure you're getting it. And give it time to work as well. Let it snap back in so you can see it. So once you've made your selection, scan around the edge. There's another bit there. If we just get that little bit in, that should hopefully do it. Yep, that's snapped back in. But we've now missed a bit. We've gone over the edge here. So what you need to do in that situation is hold down the Alt key and then just very carefully go over that area where it's gone over the edge. Release the mouse and the Alt key and hopefully it will snap back into shape. There we go. So that's the process. Go around the edge. There's another bit we need to get here. Let's just go in on that and try and select it. And that's done a pretty good job there. And then we'll move around. We've got a bit missing here. I'll need an even smaller brush on this part. So I'm going to just use the left square brackets key to come down in brush size. I'm down to 5 pixels now. And I'll just click in there and extend it. If you're wondering why it's automatically going to the plus mode to add to the selection, that's because I'm using this icon here up in the top toolbar. Use the one with the plus on. That should really be your default. You're always going to be adding to a selection using the Quick Selection tool, so leave it on that icon if it's on anything different when you first load it up. Okay, well let's keep scanning around the edge and just see if there's any more bits we can get. There we go. I'm still on my 5 pixel brush. We'll get that little bit in there. And that's done an okay job. You can see this slight defocused area hasn't been picked up, so we could be really accurate and try and pick that up as well just by mousing over it. And that's done an okay job. We'll move around. We've got this bit to pick up as well. That could give us a problem because there's a similar colour behind, but let's try it. Yeah, that's not too bad. Just do a little bit more in there. And that's okay. I now scroll around. I'm highly magnified at the moment, so any small errors shouldn't really show up on the picture. We've got a little bit here that I'll just take in if I can. And if I go in really tight and take a tiny brush, I might even get that bit there as well. There we go. And that's done a pretty good job. I'll just zoom back a bit and continue scrolling around just to see if there's anything else. There's a bit more there. We'll take that in. That's the sort of thing. And that will snap back onto the edge. And I think we're just about there. A little bit here as well. I'll use a slightly bigger brush this time, up to 7 pixels. So you can see that it's not desperately quick if you want a fairly accurate selection, but it is much quicker than using the pen tool and manually clicking around everything. So I think we're okay for now. That'll do for the sake of this tutorial. So I'll zoom back out, and what we've now got is a pretty accurate selection of our leaf. So what do we do next? Well, what we want to do is get this into its own separate layer. And there's a really useful shortcut for doing this. All you have to do once your selection is active is hit Control or Command and J. And you'll see in the Layers panel, we've got a new Layer 1, and that consists solely of our leaf. That's just a selection we made that's been punched out into its own space. So now that's floating freeform above the image, and that means we can do what we like to it without affecting the background image. So we can switch that back on, and all we got to do now is think about what we want to do to our leaf. Well, red was the colour I was after, so I'm going to go back to my normal brush tool, and now we have a red brush. I'm going to use a fairly large brush with a nice feathered edge, so I've got a soft edge brush, 700 pixels in size, and now what I'm going to do is drop the opacity down quite low, because I want this effect to be quite subtle. So we'll take the opacity slider and we'll move it down to, let's try about sort of 25%, something like that. Now you'll notice that when we punched our selection into a new layer, we lost the marching ants. And to do this technique, we need them. But the wonderful thing is, once you've made a selection and you have it stored in its own separate layer, you can easily reselect it. All you have to do is hold down the Control key or the Command key on a Mac and then just click on the layer thumbnail. And that will bring up a selection on the image of all the content in that layer. And because we only had the leaf, that's all we're going to get. So we get the same selection we had before. And the good thing about having an active selection on your image is that the paintbrush, when you start to paint, will only occur within that selection. If I paint over here, nothing will happen because it's outside the selection. Whereas if I paint on the leaf, we start to get that nice red tinge on the edge just coming through. So I can use a big feather brush. I can be as quick and as liberal as I like with the way I apply it. And all the time, I will always be inside the selection, so nothing is going to infect my background. So we can just paint that around there and get that lovely red tinge around the edges of the leaf. Now I use a slightly smaller brush just to get a bit of colouring in that area. And it looks a bit bold at the moment and a bit too zingy, but don't worry about that. We want to lay the paint down first, then we can change how we blend it with the rest of the image. So we've got a nice red tinge around the leaf, and that's looking pretty good. But of course, we're in the normal blend mode at the moment, and we don't want to use normal if we're applying a flat color, just this bold red at the moment, straight over the top of an image. So what we want to do then is change the blend mode and pick something that looks a bit more appropriate and gives a better effect on the image. So to change the blend mode, all you got to do is click where it says normal and then pick something from the long list that emerges. And if you mouse over them, if you've got the latest version of Photoshop CC, you'll find that it actually gives you a preview of how it's going to look when you use that blending mode. And you can see that some of them look absolutely awful and some of them look quite reasonable, but not that one. So we'll go up, we'll try darken and multiply. Multiply is looking pretty good actually because we're getting all the texture coming through. Multiply works a bit like an old school slide sandwich. If you hold two slides together, you get the content of both of them showing up. So it retains lots of detail and lots of colour in the picture, makes everything a little bit darker. Darken does a very similar thing, but isn't quite so aggressive in the way it's applied. And I think that's looking good. So the ones you want to look for this kind of technique are going to be darken, multiply, or sometimes overlay or soft light. That will give a different effect, but you may find it's appropriate for your particular image. Okay, so in this example, I'm going to use multiply, so I'll click on multiply, and now we have those nice bold red edges blended with the original leaf underneath. Now we'll get rid of the selection lines. We can do that by going to select and choosing deselect, or just hit Control or Command and D. That loses the marching ants, so we can see our image without any distraction. Now if we zoom back a bit, we can see it in context, and it does look a little bit too bold. It looks quite artificial, the colouring. So what we need to do now is tone it down a bit. And the easiest way to do that is by using the opacity slider in the layers panel. Make sure your leaf layer is active. There it is there. There's our leaf. There it is on its own. And all we're going to do, once we've switched the background back on, is just tone it down. So we can take the opacity down from 100, drift it back, and get it to where it looks kind of natural, but has that extra saturation, that zinginess of those red edges. And that looks quite nice around there. So that's pretty good. So there's one way you can do it. That's where we're painting directly onto the subject itself. But a better way than doing that is to actually paint simply into a separate layer. So you're not painting on the leaf that you've made, but you're painting just into a blank layer in the leaf shape. That tends to give even better results when you're using blending modes. So what we'll do, we're going to reselect our leaf, and we know how to do that. Just hold down the Control or Command key and click on the layer thumbnail. That brings our selection back up. And then what we're going to do is switch off that one that we've just done. We're now back to our regular leaf showing through from the background layer, and we're going to create a brand new layer by clicking on the Create a New Layer icon. So that gives us a blank layer too, and there's nothing on that. But we can do that same painting technique just onto a blank layer. So we'll quickly do that. I'll just get a slightly bigger brush and just paint away, get a bit of red into the edges like that. There we go. That's some nice colours coming in. And though I'm at the moment on the normal blend mode, I'm going to change that to multiply in just a jiffy once I've gone around the edge. That's the kind of thing. I think that's about right there. Okay, we'll zoom in a little bit, and now I'll change it from the normal blend mode to multiply to see the results we've got. So we go from normal and we choose multiply. And you can see there's actually a better blend because it's retaining all the detail of the original leaf. So if we compare the two, we'll switch off that one and switch this one back on. You can see there's a sort of a slight lack of detail around the red edges and a slightly artificial look to it. But if I use this one instead, we get a more natural result and we have all the full contrast of the detail underlying the multiply layer. Now in this example, if we switch off the background layer, that's all we have. There's our leaf painting with just the red edges coming through where we've increased that red content with the brush. So in this second case, that's all our layer consists of. Just a bit of red in the right shape, all retained by those marching ants thanks to the active selection. In the first one, of course, we actually have the leaf painted. So I'd always go for the second option because it gives you much more flexibility when you come to fine-tune your image and get it looking just as you want it. So let's now get rid of those marching ants. I'll hit Control, Command and D, and we can tone down the effect. It's too bold at the moment, so let's just use the opacity slider, tone down that effect a little. That looks good there. We've got those nice rich reds and oranges coming through, and if we switch it on and off, we can see the difference we've made. Yeah, that's nice. Those colours are just coming through really nicely. Now, of course, if you want to get more orange into it, say your leaf is a bit green still, you can do that too. All we need is an orange colour to paint with. So let's quickly mix up an orange. We'll click on the background colour swatch in this example, and we'll find an orange from the colour picker. Say something like that. I think that would be about right there. So we'll click OK to that, and then provided we stay within our selection, all we've got to do is do the same thing again, but perhaps paint out some of the centre with that nice orange colour. So let's make our selection. So we hold down Control or Command and we click on the layer thumbnail of the leaf. It's not even active at the moment, but we can still pluck a selection from it just by Control or Command clicking on the layer thumbnail. So that's got our layer again. I'm just going to turn up the saturation on that top layer so we can see what we're dealing with. That's all good. Then I'll create a new layer for the orange, so we'll make a new layer there. Then we want to paint in some of that orange colour. At the moment I have red in the foreground, I need orange in the foreground. So to swap them over, all I've got to do is hit X on the keyboard or click on this double-headed arrow. And that puts my orange in the foreground, so I can paint with it. Okay, so now we can do a little bit of painting with the orange. Perhaps take a bit in there. That's it. So that's laid some orange into that layer. Of course, we want to use the blend mode again, so we click where it says normal and we choose multiply, and that gives us a little splodge of that nice orange colour in the centre of the leaf. There it is on its own. That's our little blob of orange. There's our blob of red around the outside, and all we have to do is switch on the background layer to see everything in context. Now, of course, if you really wanted to push the autumn colours, you could go for a bit of yellow as well, but we'll have to create a new colour, so I'll click on the orange swatch, the foreground colour swatch, and we'll pick kind of a golden yellow, something like that. So we'll have that one, and that imports the yellow into our foreground, and we can create another layer for our yellow part. So using our brush, we can start painting a bit of that yellow in, that really zingy colour, just in the centre I think would be fine, and then we can set the blend mode to multiply, to make everything blend and mix together. And the good thing about doing things on separate layers like that is you can see what you're creating as you go, and it means you can switch off stuff that isn't quite working. So if we decide we don't like the yellow too much or we don't like the orange too much, we can leave it as it was and stick with the original red. If we put them all on the same layer, you can't really remove the orange other than by erasing it and starting again. So having separate layers each time to build up your different colours that you're using makes a lot of sense, because it again gives you lots of flexibility. Now we've got a nice zingy result, but I want to kind of fix it in the mix a bit, so I'm just going to use the opacity slider on all three of these layers to mix up the kind of effect I'm after. So certainly I want the red, but I want the orange down quite low, so let's take that down a bit. That's quite nice there. And the yellow, we can bring that down a touch too. I think that's looking good. That's giving me some nice colours. The red now, I can just adjust that. That's my dominant colour in this really. About 75% I think looks pretty good. And now if I lose those selection lines with Control or Command and D, we've got an image that looks a darn sight zingier than the one we started with. We can still backtrack, switch off those three layers. There's our original very yellow leaf, and there's our new one with a little bit of colorizing, all done using nothing more than a paintbrush and a decent selection in the first place. So now we've done all our leaf work, it's time now to finish off, and I think what I'd like to do is add kind of a vignette around the edge of this picture, just to focus the viewer's eye towards the centre and the subject a little bit more, and to do that I'm going to use the Camera Raw filter. This is a great trick that's the quickest and easiest way of adding a nice looking vignette quickly. But you have to use kind of a flattened layer in the first place. So one option is to actually flatten the image. So you take everything down to one background layer, and to do that you simply click on the flyout menu from the layers panel and choose flatten image. The other option though is a multi-fingered shortcut, which I think is a bit better. Click on your top layer and then hold down Command or Control and the Alt key and the Shift key and then hit E. And what that does, that merges everything visible into a brand new layer at the top of the stack. So what we now have in this layer 5 is kind of a flattened, merged down version of everything else beneath it. But the good news is we haven't lost anything else beneath it, so we can always backtrack and fix any issues that may arise. Okay, so with that top layer 5, that merged layer active, all we've got to do now is go up to the filter menu and choose Camera Raw Filter. That will load up on screen, and what you're looking at is the regular RAW conversion interface of Adobe Camera Raw. We're not actually using a RAW file, but we can still use all the controls as though we were. So let's just make sure you can see it all. There's the whole RAW interface, and all we're going to use is the Effects tab, because that's where we'll find the post-crop vignetting option. So once you've got that up on screen, all you've got to do is move this slider a bit to the left and you'll get a nice darkening around the edges, a nice subtle darkening that's nice and evenly balanced, and that's all the shot needs. Of course, if you like using the RAW conversion controls, there's nothing to stop you using those as well, if you prefer those to using the native Photoshop interface, for example. So you could click on the Basic tab and you can adjust your exposure and your brightness and contrast and all those kind of things. But in this instance, I don't want to do that because I've already done it. This has come from a RAW file originally. So all I'm going to do now is click OK, and that RAW filter will be processed and will add the vignette to the shot. Because we have all the other stuff underlying it, because we didn't flatten it, we simply merged to a new layer at the top, all we've got to do is switch it off and we can see the impact that vignette is having. And it is working quite strongly to focus the attention towards that leaf and the vibrant colours we've now got in the scene. So there you go, that's some fun you can have. Any leaf shot will do, and it's the sort of thing you can while away an hour if you've got bad weather outside like we've had recently. You can take a few leaf shots out in the rain if necessary and just have a little play in Photoshop and mix up some interesting techniques, because it makes a big difference if you look at our original and then you look at the end result. You can create those wonderful autumnal colours simply by getting a brush out and painting them on. Alright, thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.